That is true. We're in stealth. Been in stealth for 9 years. I think that's
Ladies and gentlemen, yeah, Entrepreneur First is still in stealth.
I think that's why it's not working so well.
What it will be later on. Welcome back, everybody. This is the 9th episode of Interintellect Humaning, which is a special YouTube series that we do to embarrass our fellow interintellects and hosts within their own fields of expertise. I'm sitting here with my really good friends, Swathy Prithivi and Matt Clifford. Swathy is founder in residence at Atomic. And Matt is the co-founder and CEO of Entrepreneur First, the still in stealth talent investor in Europe and Asia. And I gathered you guys.
America.
Sorry?
Our Toronto office will be very sad if I don't say and North America.
And North America, that's true. You guys are just like expanding, and eventually I will just say global. Global, and that's the short version. I gathered you guys today to talk a little bit about building by hand. We live in an era that seems infatuated with automation and decries micromanagement of all forms, from helicopter parenting versus tiger moms to starting startups or investing in them. We have a lot of conversations about Interintellect, about your work, and I know that you guys have kind of devised your own version of this, which I found extremely useful and instructive for myself as well. And also something that I think only can arise from extensive experimentation and first principle thinking. So I would love to explore that a little bit in a way that may be interesting for all interintellects, whether what they're building is their first novel or their education, or in some cases, a company. Do you guys want to maybe just give a little bit of an intro and background of yourselves, and what did you think when you got the invitation to talk about this topic? We will start with Swathy.
Great, thank you, Anna, for having me. My name is Swathy. I'm based in San Francisco. As Anna mentioned, I'm a founder in residence at Atomic Ventures. And I've been there for this past year working on a stealth telemedicine company. So excited for it to finally come out of stealth in a couple of weeks. My experience before that has been in sort of scaling tech companies. So I had failed startups of my own that only sort of encouraged me to continue on building startups, because I thought it was the most exhilarating and exhausting place all in once. So my experience has been at Uber. I joined Uber when there were about 100 people, and ride sharing sort of launched the same week that I joined. At that point, Phoenix was the city that had launched, and Uber was like, what a global company, we're in Phoenix now. And so fast forward like 5.5 years, I got to do lots of amazing things. I ran ride sharing in the Bay Area. I got to launch Uber in a few countries around the world, India, Israel, and Poland. And then I joined a skunkworks team at Uber to build things on top of the Uber platform. And so we tried, flowers and toothbrushes in a car, and then sandwiches in a car. And what a shocker. The highest volume of delivery was food. And so UberEats came out of that. And so it was really amazing to see UberEats go from sandwiches in the trunk of a car in LA to, this global business that is now, especially given the pandemic, really meaningful for Uber's P&L. After about 5.5 years, definitely felt like decades. I realized I really liked the operational, like the gnarly stuff. I liked unsexy industries and the gnarly operational stuff, but I wanted to try a different industry. And I joined a company called Open Door, which is making home buying and selling far easier, and joined them to set up their launch team, and then ran two of the biggest markets, so Central Florida and DFW in Texas, Dallas in Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth. And that was an incredible experience. When you buying and selling homes and renoing it makes, food delivery, making, the complexity involved with renoing and rehabbing homes and selling them makes delivering burritos to drunk people look a lot easier. And so after about 2.5 years there, had a wonderful experience, managed a really large team. I had sort of the urge to go from like the Navy ship to a pirate, the Navy tanker to a pirate ship, and decided this is the I wanted to try something on my own. One of the co-founders at Open Door, JD Ross, is a GP at Atomic. I'd worked with him in passing, and so connected with him and joined Atomic earlier this year. Didn't realize what a crazy year it was going to be to start something. But again, in keeping with sort of the gnarly operational themes, the industry that I was most interested in were healthcare and education. Lots of space, definitely a great year for telemedicine, and just a very interesting year. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you so much. Did you always know that you like the gnarly part? Is it something where that maybe like drove you to technology?
Yeah, I actually didn't. My background is industrial and systems engineering, and so I did supply chain. I worked with a massive supply chain company after undergrad in Asia, and I didn't think that there was a place for me in tech, because it was so, right, it's applied math, it's systems engineering. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm not computer science or electrical engineering. And so maybe I'm going to deal with more of the offline things. And so I think something like an Uber is when I realized, I'm like, wow, there's this whole space where it's online meets offline. And you can still bring in all the systems thinking, right? When you talk about operations or anything else, it's systems thinking and processes, and you can bring that to tech. And it's been fascinating that it's lovely to have the Facebooks and the Googles and the Snapchats, but Uber, DoorDash, Instacart, like the marketplaces where it starts online, but it has to end offline, and both of them have to come together, is just really, really incredible and just really fun for me to apply skill sets. So didn't know that, actually, didn't even think there was a place. And I was like, wow, so I can actually be useful in a tech company, even if I don't code.
Wow. I mean, we did this salon with Visa, I think last week, about community building. And it turned out that so many people in the room who come from, who ended up building communities come from music and politics, because that's, maybe the most obvious, those are the most obvious fields where you start online and end up offline, or you build the audience in the crowd, and then they actually show up at the concerts or at the ballots. And it's those are interesting fields to learn as well. Thank you so much, Matt. Can we throw over the mic to the UK? We're going from San Francisco to Oxford.
Great. I'm excited to be here. Although I'm slightly daunted by the title, "Building by Hand," in that I suppose a big part of what I have been trying to do with Entrepreneur First, which is, as you mentioned, is the company I started now 9 years ago, is actually sort of building systems to avoid building by hand in an industry that I think generally is still considered artisanal and bespoke and by hand. Although maybe I can touch on what elements I think remain very much by hand even in our model. But yeah, I started Entrepreneur First with Alice, my co-founder, back when I was extremely young, naive, inexperienced, and unqualified to start it. I had started my career at McKinsey in London, really because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and it felt like it was the choice that maximized optionality. And it was, in many ways, that was exactly the right choice. Partly because it allowed me to observe that there were a lot of people like me who were really ambitious, that really were seeking maximum impact, but didn't know where to find it. And in a way, I think, so this was like London 2009 that I joined McKinsey. So I sort of graduated into the financial crisis. And I think in retrospect, it was a very special moment, because it was a moment where it suddenly became clear to a lot of people that the sort of obvious destination for maximizing leverage over the 3 or 4 decades before that had been financial and professional services. And that era was coming to an end, and the sort of original and really enduring mission of Entrepreneur First is to say, well, actually we're in a new era now, and there's that wonderful Gibson line about the future being here, just not being evenly distributed. And I think the future of ambition, the future of careers, is already very obvious in San Francisco, and that's why great people like Swathy are drawn to Uber, even when they feel that I'm not a tech person, right? And I felt in London in 2011 that wasn't happening. Like, in fact, it's almost the other way around, that like great people were being drawn to finance for no reason other than us, kind of what people like me are supposed to do. And this is a very long way of saying what Entrepreneur First does is, we tried to create a new category of venture capital. We call it talent investing. And the thesis of talent investing is that there are many people out there who would be great founders, but the main barriers they face are actually cultural, not financial, although that is a big thing. Certainly not skill or ambition or character. And so, our job is to create little bubbles of Silicon Valley in parts of the world that don't yet have that mentality, and most importantly, don't have that network density. So how do you find a co-founder if all the smartest people you went to college with want to be bankers and consultants? How do you find investors when all the investors that made any money in your city did it in real estate or in credit or commodities? And so, EF's job is to say, we're going to create communities worldwide where individuals can come pre-company, certainly pre-team, often pre-idea, embed themselves in that community. We'll pay them to do so for a short period of time in exchange for an option to invest in what they create while they're with us. And then sort of use that global community to plug them in at the right time to places like the Bay Area where, they no longer feel like they're the weirdos. Suddenly they're doing what's normal. Anyway, that was far too long, but that's what I do.
No, I think this is absolutely fascinating. There is so you have the EF ecosystem, and I always enjoy hearing stories about the actual founders and how founders find each other, and then it becomes very human. I remember Matt, you were a panelist at one of the events I did last year before this madness even started, and a person in the audience asked you. And I remember you immediately got what the question was, and it took me a while to actually understand, because to you that was probably something that you spent a lot of time thinking about. For myself, that was the first time. And basically, he asked you about the compatibility and this psychological layer to guiding people through this process. I mean, obviously, you guys succeed if the founder succeeds, and the founder succeeds if the founding duo succeeds in many ways, right? So it's in your great interest to make those combinations work. And so you will, I would imagine, accumulate a lot of knowledge throughout the years, what makes a co-founding duo work. And I remember you gave these super unintuitive takes on this. Like, my favorite was that how sleeping patterns are so important, because Swathy is laughing because we have almost the same sleeping pattern, even though I'm in Europe and she's in the Bay Area. But like that, you said that every co-founder has to be awake for at least 8 of the same hours of the day. Is that still your view?
I've forgotten I said that. Yeah, I think it. That is probably still something I believe. It's interesting, the pandemic meant that we went remote pretty early, actually, because two of our 6 cities are in Asia and were hit much earlier than we were in Europe. So we started having to change things in January in Singapore, and also a lot of our cities are places like London or Singapore where they're open migrant cities where people come to realize careers. So suddenly we'd recruited all these people to join our programs, and it was either say, hey, sorry, I know you quit your job to do this, but good luck, or run remote. And turns out running remote largely works. Definitely some new challenges, but it's definitely made the time zone thing more acute, because now they're not even in the same time zone necessarily. But yeah, I think there's a few things people learn about what makes a great co-founding pair. I mean, what I thought you were going to say, which maybe is a good starting point, and sort of something I think about, it came to mind when you said building by hand, is I think one of the interesting challenges in our business is, how do we make sure that nothing we do artificially sort of caps out the caliber and ambition of the people we work with? So, the reality is, I've learned a lot over the last 9 years doing this, but, if I'm the reason that someone wants to do EF, one, that doesn't scale, but worse, there are people out there who will not look at me and say, wow, what an aspirational figure to get to work with. And they're right. And so, the reason I think often about systems.
Why is that? Why would anybody think that?
Well, I think the point is you want people, ideally as a venture investor, you want to work with people who sort of have no limits on their ambitions, or at least can be nudged into that position. And so one thing we think about a lot at EF is how do we make sure that no one person that works at EF is sort of the accidental cap on the aspirations of the people that work with them. And I think one of the great skills you can have in life, but I think it's certainly true in venture, is to be someone who can raise the aspirations of people who are more talented than you are. Actually, Tyler Cowen has a great post on this, on the like underrated returns from raising aspirations. But I think the nuance there is that, it's kind of easy to, if you're Peter Thiel or Reid Hoffman, it's kind of easy to sit on the other side of the table and raise aspirations because, you're a billionaire and, you've done this multiple times. And I'm lucky to have Reid on my board, and he does. He raises my ambitions all the time. I'm not a billionaire. That's my spoiler. So how can I raise the ambitions of like would-be billionaires? I think that's a really interesting thing to be able to do, to actually increase ambition, even if you're not yourself the person building the $1 trillion company.
I'm reminded of this part in Cam Vance's documentary, The Roosevelts, where they talk about FDR's leadership style. And one of the experts, I don't think it's the narrator, somebody in an interview says that FDR was so confident, like they say he was the true egoist, that he was not worried about other people, and he kept hiring people who were better than him because he never felt threatened. He was just like, this is my spot in the world. And he just hired the best people, like the smartest people, the best military leaders, best scientists. And he was just like, I'm the dumbest person in the room. He was okay with that. And we all know, the amazing results that came from that. Swathy, any takes on aspiration raising as part of the building process?
No, absolutely. I love I love that article where it's like, it's such an underrated thing, right? And it's, I know Matt does that with founders, but I think doing that with team members and employees is equally important, right? Because when you're building something, it's not just you, right? And there's so much, of course, there needs to be the company shaped, from the co-founders, right? The founders really shape the company, but it takes so many more people to get across the line, despite whatever glossy print articles say. And so raising ambitions, right? Working with a Travis, working with a Eric at Open Door, it's one of those things where the best leaders, the best, sort of CEOs, the best founders, the best investors, you go in and it's continually raising the bar, and you're like, why couldn't I think about this being a multi-billion-dollar company? It's not that it's a guaranteed shot, but if you don't even think that way, you don't even start building in that different capacity. And increasing ambition is something I actively think about with team members, to say, hey, how do you build machines? And it's like, none of you are being hired for the role that you're doing today. This could change in 3 to 6 months. And, I want to work for you, right? So how do you, and I find it's really interesting when you're like, hey, I'm hiring you because I'm hoping one day I can work for you. And the one great thing about Silicon Valley, I mean, many ups and downs, and now it's more of a remote, is to Matt's point, it's a very one-horse town, right? It's a company town, and it's actually really delightful. It's also, it definitely has drawbacks. There are not enough bookshops, anyway.
Like Benedict Evans.
Exactly. I feel him. Now after like London bookstores, like I get it. I'm like, yes, there's some nice ones, but not even close. But it's a company town, and it's like really the city as a whole just raises ambition levels, and it's so interesting. And the community as a whole plays these long-term, infinite iterated games, and so it makes sense that you treat everyone as a peer, even if they're an intern, right? You just don't know if this intern 3 years from now, this intern has like a multi-billion-dollar company, and it just doesn't make sense at all. And so everybody, right, when you treat people as peers and treat their ideas as incredible, it just, something magical comes out of that. And I think it's that mindset that's really, really interesting. And so, when you think about building by hand, it's like, that's what I'm hoping team members do. For me with Uber, the most incredible thing from Uber is not, I mean, it's lovely, right? It's like there's definitely financial upside. I have a lot more security in my life, but the most incredible thing is, and of course, seeing, leaders, build a company, but the peer network is just so rich. And they're all doing such fascinating things, from like, sort of sports betting to, the dog marketplaces. Like, it's just like, it's incredible. It's like the alumni network, is nuts. And it's all people. I'm like, oh, like, I worked with you on a cross-functional project. I hired you to do, right, like, into my team. And it's just really fascinating that everybody's been raising their bar, and you just don't know. One person is now running, that you're like, I didn't know this person wanted to be a founder, but oh, well, they're running a really successful company. And so anyway, it's really interesting to not just see that in a quote, but to see that in real life. And it was very interesting, even with, open doors in markets like Florida and Texas, and going to those markets. And I think what the Silicon Valley mindset is to be like, there's no reason we're in some hierarchical relationship. Yes, you have an organizational structure to get things done. But other than that, I'm really hoping I get to work, get to work for the intern one day, because that's amazing. Because they're going to come up with ideas that I'm not going to be able to sustain for decades. And what fun to work on really interesting problems.
I remember exploring this a little bit in one of our conversations, Swathy, how, at the beginning at Uber, you were doing things pretty hands-on, right? And the tech was not very developed, and there was a lot of kind of personal liaising with drivers and kind of building out the system from scratch. It's kind of hard to imagine now that, this used to be a limousine rental company. And of course I observed you at work, and I know that this is something that you, just like myself in many ways, we live by these rules and these philosophies. But you also, you sometimes speak about how, the reason why you were confident to do this in Los Angeles with the drivers, for example, came from the fact that you saw this from the leaders that you worked with, and that they were also very deeply involved in parts of the company that you don't necessarily expect them to be. And is that the magic sauce? And do you think that this was actually something with a trickle-down effect?
Yeah, that's a great question. Never LA. My peers in LA who actually onboarded drivers will would reach out. Other markets, San Francisco,
okay.
Warsaw.
Yeah, maybe LA is very
Tel Aviv,
hardcore in that sense. Yeah, maybe that's a different genre.
I think in many ways, Travis, who was the founder of Uber and sort of is no longer the CEO, is definitely a controversial figure. But it was sort of lots of it is sort of second, third order implications of things. But I think Travis was a very hands-on leader. And I think Uber really couldn't be where it was without some of that focus and that aggression and that ambition, just incredible ambition, right? When you're to think when you're just on, when it's a fancy limousine, sort of on-demand app, to think, right, that this is going to replace car ownership. And most importantly, right, like, it's easy to say those platitudes, but to push the team to be aggressive, I think and be ambitious is really interesting. And for me personally, as an immigrant, as a woman, for me, it was really wonderful, because Uber was the first place where I was given feedback. It's like, be more aggressive. And I'm like, I have never in my life gotten feedback to be more aggressive. I'm like, okay, cool. This is great. It's so much easier to go from like good to great than it is to go from bad to mediocre. So I'm like, okay, cool. This is the spot. And this is, and I think that combined with being thrown into things. I remember Matt's statement of like, he started it and right, you felt sort of underqualified for it. I think that's where magic happens, right? It's like, I was in my late 20s and they're like, cool, you're going to go launch India and good luck. And I'm like, and things are happening, right? It's like, it's not like there's overly Of course, there's support and of course there's overview, but it's basically like, okay, cool. You're going to collect stuff. You're going to propose pricing. Travis is going to sign off on it, and wonderful, go launch. Like, and you're like, okay, this is like really.
And you did it, right? I mean, they sent you because they knew that you will get S done. It was done.
And when we talk about experiences, you know, with folks, that's what is so incredible, right? It's like raise the ambition level and then pair them, right, with projects where the water is like about here, right? Like, and I actually agree that it needs to be a little bit of a struggle, and startups are that, and work-life balance is important. I'm clearly not the poster child for it, but I think it's important to have that level of difficulty. Like, you need to be struggling a little bit in order to push forward. And I think when you put people, raise their ambition level, give them the autonomy, and then put them in projects where the water is just right their neck, I think that's what was so great about Uber. You could see all these incredible things. There was a period in time where Uber would launch a city a day, basically in a period of weeks. And it would be all these cities. You had to like look up a map to be like, where is the city in Africa? Where is the city in Latin America? It's like the 14th city in like Colombia. You're like, excellent, cool. I'm so glad we launched there. But yes, it's to build on that point, right? Like raising ambition, having seen that as an effect. I think now for teams, I think one of the best things that you can do, speed and ambition is really what startups have, right? Like, you can have all these fancy slides about moats and everything else, but it's really speed and ambition, and raising that for the entire team and saying, listen, like, I know you may have come from areas where there's a lot more structure, but we're growing so fast, we have no time. I'm going to let you own this. We're going to agree on principles, but like, this is I don't need to sign off on a bunch of decisions. There's some decisions I want to make, and make sure that we are aligned on decisions before you're sort of left to run. But after that, like, the way you give me leverage and I get to, right, like the giving away your Legos in first round review, the way that happens is you get to do more interesting stuff. I get to do more interesting stuff, and it's a win-win. And so that's been sort of the most fun part.
There's something really powerful about this, this idea that, which I think is part of what you're saying, that people's abilities as operators, executors, founders generally, I think there's this like idea out there that there's some way of determining those abilities like analytically in advance, like, oh, you know, like, how good is Matt? How good is Anna? And actually, I think exactly what you just said, you know, they're actually like, they're emergent. Those abilities are like emergent phenomena. They come out of the environment that people are placed in, the incentive structures, the community, the peer networks. And, you know, I think you actually articulated much better than I was trying to at the start, sort of, why do I think that, you know, EF is a great place for a future billionaire in Bangalore or Paris to come? Not because, you know, you get to work with me, right? That's the right. That would be crazy. The point is that the structure, the environment, the fact that it is actually too hard to try and build a venture backable business with a stranger in 3 months, that is actually what causes the abilities of the very best people in that group to emerge. And I find that just so, I get to see that like now literally hundreds of times a year, and it's it never ceases to amaze me and be a thrill to watch people sort of embrace and then overcome those like structural challenges that actually push people into productivity and to discover skills and reserves that they didn't realize they had. And that's an amazing thing. And it sounds like Uber was just like that.
It really was. And I think one of the things you're mentioning is so true. I think, you know, love the ideas and thoughts that you put into the world. And part of it is, you know, you are EF and people are drawn to that as an idea. And would love to hear your thoughts on when people are drawn to an idea of a person, right? You see this with founder narratives and CEOs. Of course, there's some value in having that leadership signal that it's like, hey, this is what we stand for. This is what we're coming for. But then the people who emerge need to come in and say, well, your image is one thing, your ideas crap many times, right? And so your image is one thing, but I'm going to tell you this is nonsense, and I'm going to actively debate. And so one of the things that's been really fun is to tell teams, I'm like, disagree with me. I'm like, I'm very animated. I am going to pounce down your throat, but that's just me. It's indicative of the idea. It's not indicative of you.
Yeah.
And tell me I'm wrong. Or just right. And I'm just wondering how, if that's something you see with the entrepreneur cohorts where you're prolific, you have this history of doing stuff. It's like your newsletter is amazing and intimidating. And then they come in and they're like, okay, I'm here with a co-founder. I'm here for 3 months. Like, and if you, how do they overcome that?
Well, I actually think maybe I answer that by saying something that I think is special about Silicon Valley, and you can tell me if it's true, and then sort of, and I'll try and bring it around to being an answer to the question, which is, I think one thing Silicon Valley gets really right that is really antithetical to a lot of other high-performing professional cultures is the value placed on the most valuable idea that someone has rather than the median quality of the idea that they have. Mm-hmm. And that's right. I mean, obviously, if we were like civil engineers, then you know how the median value you don't want your median bridge to collapse. I get it. Like some of it is like structural, right? Mm-hmm. But I think one thing people underestimate about startups is how much it really just matters to have enough ideas that the best ones are very, very good. And the reason this is coming around to an answer to your question is, I think if you can establish that as a cultural norm, it actually makes even the most intimidating people, which I'm definitely not, very unintimidating, because it means that you sort of don't have to take any one thing that person says as gospel or as conclusive or even sensible. You know, you can kind of assume that the most important leaders in your company will be wrong about a lot of things. And as long as everyone gets that and sort of sees, you know, when are you in generative mode and when are you filtering, I think it actually gives, I mean, you talked about like, everyone wants to make sure that they get to work for the intern one day. Part of what enables that is the sort of intellectual and sort of organizational flatness that comes from saying the leaders aren't there because they're always right. And I think once you like really internalize that, yeah, you may want to spend time with a leader because you know that at their best moments, they add something that others can't or don't add. But you don't have to take everything so seriously.
Literally.
Yeah, literally, right. And so, you know, when I think about that from, you know, I mean, let's not take me, but when I think of some of our venture partners who are genuinely like, you know, famous people in our, like Benedict Evans is one of our venture partners. Like when, you know, I've sat, one of the things we do after 3 months, we do an investment committee, which is 3 of us, usually, you know, at least one of me or Alice or one of our other partners, and then some of our venture partners. You know, I've seen, we do them on Zoom now, obviously. And, you know, I see, you don't know who you're going to get usually if you're on the other end, partly just scheduling complexity. You know, I see sometimes they come on and they see Benedict there. And like their faces are hilarious. Like this is someone who, you know, they've been reading for sometimes, you know, 10 years and, you know, they just see us. And I don't think Benedict would mind me saying like, he's not always right. And, you know, like some people are really intimidated by him and his questions. And he does have a wonderful verbal style. Slight digression. One of my favorite moments with Benedict in the investment committee, someone said to him, does that answer your question? He said, well, it rephrases my question, which I thought was a wonderful. But, you know, I think what's great is if you build a culture where that, you know, that just washes off, not because you don't have an ego or, you don't care, but because you have to set up a culture, I think, where you believe that ultimately ideas will have to win on their merits, not on what Matt or Anna or Swathy thinks about them, you know, after a 30-minute exposure to them.
Yeah, that's really compelling. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I would imagine the great equalizer effect of the Zoom, right? The Zoom experience, that you can meet the most, you know, frightening people in your industry, and they are sitting at home, and maybe their father kind of like wanders in the background, or your children, you know, and
which I'm going to shut this door because my 2-year-old is
go for it. And so there's definitely there's this kind of leveling there that we see into people's, you know, homes, and see that they are just humans as well.
And I don't know if I'm allowed to ask questions. I don't know if you're like the. I don't
change
know
the rules. This is a council of leaders. I did not expect you guys to just.
No, I'm here. I want to benefit from the wisdom in the room. I'm super intrigued by. I mean, as I said, I keep coming back to this title, like building by hand, and I actually think one of the like really interesting questions in operating is like, when to automate, when to systematize, when to move away from bespoke. Maybe you're going to ask this anyway, Anna, but you know, I'm super intrigued. You know, you've worked you know, at least 2 companies that, you know, have been category leaders in figuring out scale in a not purely software space, right? As you said, like where offline meets online. Do you have any like general just learnings on that question of like, when do you stop doing things that don't scale, and, you know, when do you actually start to automate?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and also a really like heavy lots of answers. I'm going to start by saying when I talk to people about this, one of the earliest things that they conflate is and this is similar with social media and you know, newsletters and blogs too. It's like they look at the perfect surface, and then they assume the perfection extends all the way through, which it really doesn't, right? And so in many ways, what an Uber helped, that sort of, you know, took to open door, and what, you know, as in the startup that I am now, what what I try to work with my team on is like unlearning many things, because there's such an idea, there's such a really smart people, right, who like to think really meaningfully about problems, make everything so much more complicated. I was telling Anna this, where it's like, the doing things that don't scale is how you start. There's no way you start with like fantastic internal tools, and the perfection needs, you fake it till you make it. The perfection needs to be clear to the customer. That's when you have product market fit and stickiness and retention and all of those lovely things. But the way you get there is not how you're judged, right? Like you're only judged on the experience you deliver and the cash that you get and how they come back. Everything else can be really manual. And I think one of the most liberating things from the Uber experience was how manual things were, even at like scale. Right. Driver payments, for instance, was run manually by, and there's some tools, right? It's not like a ledger note. Operations managers.
I was going to say, Anna, you should hear this and fill your blood pressure.
This is my going to bed mantra at night.
Operations managers.
Having 2 Excel sheets. Yes.
Yes. Operations managers in 400 cities or 500 cities around the world would all convene on, you know, sort of, it was it's not Slack, but it's like the hip chat.
Yeah.
Because on Monday night, like engineers ran it as like a bulk payment. And so if you missed that, right, like I can't tell you how manual it is. You miss it and you're like, oh crap, now you got to text all your driver partners and be like, oh, I'm so sorry. Maybe I should go to a bank and withdraw stuff. Like it's right. It's like, it's really incredibly manual. And people always overestimate that. So to give you like a fun story, when we launched, Bangalore was the first city that we launched at Uber in India, and it was pretty much like the
I
entire
could tell
thing
you
was
some Uber Bangalore stories. I have to say, it's my least favorite city to get Uber in.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I still feel I haven't worked there for years.
I once got Uber from the airport in Bangalore downtown, and twice on the journey, the Uber crashed and I had to get out and get another Uber.
Oh God. Yeah.
Anyway, that's not the topic, but we'd say this offline.
But from a support perspective, right? Like technical infrastructure and Wi-Fi is like a huge issue. And one of the really fun stories at Bangalore is we started out by giving iPhones to drivers, and in Bangalore the iPhone is worth more than the car. So there's that. And so there's a fun story where it's like, we walk into the Apple store and I'm like, hi, like I'd like to purchase 50 iPhones. And the person just looks at me. They're like, there's a sheikh visiting the city today. Are you buying on his behalf? And I'm like, nope, I intend to take this and give it to drivers who are in the parking lot. And they're like, that's catch. And the second is, sort of cell phones and SIM cards are really regulated, for terrorism purposes in India. And so the way you get individual SIM cards is an individual has to be associated with it. And the way we got the first dozen is basically college student interns all signed up in lines across the city and got like, that's the level of, right? It's like people think they're like, oh, like you hear the news articles. And I'm like, no, like the way you get there is in Tel Aviv, I don't speak Hebrew. And everyone's like, why did they send you to go launch Tel Aviv? And like, I have recorded recruiting messages. So like I wave down a taxi and I'm like, hey, can I play this message for you that tells you about Uber and then ask you to come to a recruiting session, right? It's like, it's the unsexy portions of this. And of course you have to think about automation, but what seems to be clear when I talk to people thinking about startups is they automate way too early.
Yeah.
And it's just, and what comes at the, right, like what you lose with the automation is that you lose perfecting the customer experience. Like just nail what that experience is, right? Like you
developing the intuition as well, right? Like there's like, at least I observed this on myself, like the parts of our business that are very manual, that's where weirdly we develop intuitions.
Yes, exactly.
And become more
you actually
astute at like predicting user behavior, even though it doesn't come with the dashboard, it doesn't come with the graph. It's just, you find your kind of monkey brain being able to
you absolutely get into
next step. And it's so interesting because it kind of goes against all the, startup school wisdoms and I don't know.
It is. And I think the other thing that's really interesting is when you automate too early, you build a current system and versus, right, like your system today is different from what happens when you scale, and you give your system, and in many ways, you build a too rigid system, right, that then can't necessarily evolve, or it just adds a lot of technical debt and operational debt to sort of undo. Versus what I thought, what Uber was really good at. And it's one of those things that you realize, like you have to go out into the sun to realize the value of the shade. You go out and you try to build these tools for, companies and your own companies. And you're like, wow, that actually made a lot of sense. Uber built like minimum viable tools, just enough tools where you could run things. And it was very like decentralized. So payments meant you uploaded this manual thing and ran it, and engineering ran a script. But everything else until that point is right. So the tooling needed to do something. You weren't locked into a rigid system, and that actually allowed innovation at the edges to understand what was going on. And in addition, right, it's I don't know, we're over-indexing on Uber at this point, but it's in addition to all of those things. You did all these things that don't scale, but at the same time you set pricing for the city, having sort of a consolidated person who did, it's kind of like the chess boxing. You played chess and you boxed, and I think that gave you like a really holistic, nuanced perspective on the city. And then you answered like support tickets. Like there was no,
I was just going to say that the best example of this is customer HR and customer service.
It is customer service.
The founders answer tickets, because there's no other way to really kind of get into the shoes of your users, right?
Exactly. And I'm sure I understand. And Siri is getting into the conversation, but so it used to be really fun, because when we were all these, interesting cities, a question would always come up at all hands, and they're like, oh, like Travis and founders, like we really need to understand customers in like other places, and like we should go visit these teams and shadow them. And Travis would be like, excellent point. The best way to do that is to manage the driver and support queue for that city from where you are. And then you're like, ugh. No. and it's so true. Like yes, there's some things you find in the city, but support tickets, right, are just so incredibly meaningful. And so I think, one, not building too early, right? It's because you just don't have resources. Not building too early so that you're not locked into systems, and you're then creating all these second, third order processes to fix. It's like a band-aid on top of a broken system that doesn't scale. And then 3, holistic insights and to build leaders from the company. And so what was really interesting, even some of the best product managers at Uber came in from operations, because these are, they're sort of ex-banking, ex-consulting. They, you come in, with this very theoretical idea of like, okay, I'm going to build a beautiful DCF model. And it used to be really funny. We'd all come in and, our GMs and Travis would be like, the output of every model says get more drivers. He's like, I don't want to see another model. Just go get drivers, right? Like that's the harsh truth. And simplifying it and getting it done and answering support tickets meant that when products needed to be scaled and built, folks had deep knowledge of their cities in the trenches and could build products that helped operators. And so that seems to be the really interesting thing is do less, do just enough, and feel comfortable throwing a bunch of people at the problem. And I think in the midst of all of that, I think PayPal's right, it's their fraud mechanism was always, there's always some portion that's human, right, that humans would work on versus automation. And so I think it is the 3 things that have helped in telemedicine in the space that we're in. It's a completely different set of challenges, right? Because the bar is higher. You can't afford to make any mistakes. And so part of what we've been chewing on is, what are the bare essential things that make that make an experience or make the medical interaction successful? What do humans do best and what do machines do best? And then, you start with all humans, and then you sort of, slowly have a plan to slowly move things across as you feel like you've learned enough to set a system that doesn't lock you in, maximizing optionality. And so that's been actually the most interesting and challenging so far.
I think this point
does that rephrase the question, or does that answer the question?
I think this point about doing the things that don't scale, doing the manual things because it develops intuitions is really profoundly important for founders. Because so one of our strongest empirical signals of a founding pair that's going to be successful is productivity, which is probably uncontroversial and obvious, in whatever direction. So what I mean by that is, actually one of my partners has a great post about this where, he talks about talented meanderers versus, and I can't remember the adjective now, but the point being that we would much rather now back a pair that is moving super fast in the wrong direction than a team that sort of is extremely thoughtful and pensive about everything and seeing or tells you that they're iterating towards the right direction, but they're doing instead
of do something that doesn't scale, do something.
Yeah, do something. And I think as long as you are, obviously dangerous to take that literally, but we should take it seriously. I think as long as you're doing that in a way where you're building intuition. One of my favorite stories about this is a telehealth company we have in London called Accurix, which, 2 guys who met at Entrepreneur First back in 2016, I guess. And they, they knew they wanted to do something in healthcare, but they weren't really sure what. And they felt that primary care, so general practice, was sort of the place to play. And they rightly identified antibiotic resistance as, one of the great challenges facing humanity. And so, 3 months is not very long when you take into account they also have to find someone they're willing to work with in that time. Not just willing, right? Excited to work with. Pick a shared problem, test it with customers, all the usual stuff. And so they're like, cool, well, antibiotic resistance, big problem. The problem must be all these doctors are just doing prescriptions wrong. And so, they went out and, they built a mock-up of, better prescribing software. And it turned out the doctors basically did not want this at all. And actually, if you think about the implicit model you're creating of the doctor, it's like, you're great, but maybe you could just ignore your training and just like do what my little piece of software, you know, it's not an easy sell. But these guys literally just spoke to hundreds and hundreds of doctors, like dozens in a week, and were just iterating on the wrong product so fast and with such productivity. And so when it came to having to decide whether to invest, you know, I was like banging the table that we should invest, even though everyone's like, well, it doesn't really feel like they're going in the right direction. And, you know, this continued for a long time. They graduated from EF, and I don't know what the typical raise out of EF was at the time in London, but, you know, I guess it was still, even then, north of, yeah, it's probably like £1.5 million, $2 million, something like that. These guys raised like 200K, largely from doctors who, you know, just they'd met. But they were still going so fast, even if it was in the wrong direction. I vividly remember meeting them 6 months after they raised their 200K in this cafe in London, where they were like, you know, one of the reasons that people say that they don't use the software is that when they prescribe the drugs, the patients don't take them. So we built this tool to text a reminder to the patient after the prescription. And that they use all the time. And in fact, they're hacking it to like send different messages, because there's all sorts of things that patients don't do. I was like, oh, well, you know, maybe just do that and, you know, see what happens. Anyway, they end up building this really beautiful, essentially messaging software for doctor-patient interaction that sits on top of the electronic health record. But, you know, I didn't know what to make of it. But the acquired habits of productivity and the sort of intuition built about the doctor-patient relationship, it just went up and up and up and up and up. And, you know, by February of this year, 40% of UK doctors were using this service. By May of this year, because of the pandemic, 98% of UK doctors were using this service. They now have 98% market share in primary care in the UK. And like, yeah, okay, the pandemic was an accelerant, but these guys' intuitions about like what primary care doctors want they're just so impressive. And I gotta believe it's because they were just persisted with trying to sell this drug prescription software to hundreds of people and gradually learning from it. Anyway, this is a long story, but I guess it just really resonates.
The microwave oven.
Amazing story.
Invented, right? Like they didn't try to invent the microwave oven. Right. We're trying to invent something completely different.
And maybe I'm just saying because it vindicates my approach to investing, which is, you know, bet on talent and bet on productivity, and don't worry so much about the other stuff. But it's become like my big mantra.
That's an incredible story because it's compounding, right? It's like, it's all the same things. Now you have just nuanced, like layers of understanding that someone who just read about, you know, you and your product, and like the biology calls it the idea maze, right? It's like once you're so entrenched in the idea maze, and you can answer all the different, what happens if this, it's just so incredibly like that with speed is just magical, right? Like it's just a thing to behold.
I mean, you know that people keep asking me about like, oh, how did the Interintellect come to be? And it feels so unintuitive. And it's because I was trying to build something completely different. And whenever I would encounter a hurdle and I was like, oh, the code doesn't work, people don't use this, whatever was the problem of the day, I would be like, well, the one thing I can do is I can go off to, I don't know, one of the University of London campuses and interview 1,000 people today. That I can do. I have a notebook and my legs. And you know, if you do that consistently across the years, then you have spoken with, and you start doing it globally, then at some point you're left with incredibly valuable, completely proprietary data sets. And so I really recommend making those mistakes.
100%.
But it's also about, like, I think it's really good news for people who expect to just kind of wake up with a genius idea and be the genius in the room, as opposed to, you know, what Matt, you and I keep discussing, which is the scenius and the collective intelligence, and how to train and use the skills of a group and create frameworks for groups to be incredibly inventive together. Whether you use Google's, you know, Project Aristotle, or you build on, you know, ARPANET or more historical examples. I think that's.
Yeah, one of the things with scenius too, right? I think that the thing that Matt is saying is it's easy to see the, you know, sort of scenius in a collective, and then so much energy spent on getting in that group, versus I think the raw thing that Matt's saying is so many important problems, right? Like people are actually not working on them, and it's actually the barrier is ambition and right, like, and getting things done. And so you basically, scenius or not, philosophy or not, if you just hammer away, and of course there has to be some directional alignment, it just can't be like just hammer, but if you hammer and then you take feedback signals to eventually do it, is what you're saying, right? You eventually realize that it's the incredible problems in the world are actually not being solved. And I think that's the other thing that Silicon Valley does, right? It's like it democratizes. Elon Musk is fantastic, right? Of course, he's a genius, but you're like, and this is a leap, but you're like, okay, he didn't know anything about rockets. He sold PayPal, and then he went really deep. And yes, he has a scientific mind, but there's not a universe between us, right? If I did that and focused everything on it, maybe I have a shot, right? And maybe not that exact thing, but I think that approach is like really refreshing, because when you see the heroic press around investors and founders and Twitter, and it's just like, people who are building don't really have that much time to tweet. I remember like Lenny Rachitsky, who writes this wonderful newsletter. He's like, I started writing the newsletter because I don't work at Airbnb anymore. I had no time to write any of this when I was there, because I was actually doing the experiments and learning it.
I don't know, Matt, how you do it. Like, you're one of the busiest people I know, and you just have, when does the newsletter happen?
It doesn't happen. Exactly. It doesn't happen. It's like, I had to force myself to like tweet this month, and I'm like, every night at like after set meetings, I'm like 9:30, I'm like, oh, what insight do I have from today to
I saw it. There was a thread today on how to write threads on Twitter, and I was just like, oh, we've reached peak. I think I want to pick up on that, which I think is what really powerful, and sort of something I intuitively believe, but I think you've brought out why it's true, which is like, and I say this to founders a lot of the time when trying to raise ambitions, which is obviously a huge part of what my personal job is at EF, which is like, there is no ambition feasibility trade-off. Like, it isn't that like, oh, if you want to increase your odds, just lower your ambitions a bit and, like, it gets easier. But so many people have that intuition, I think, particularly outside Silicon Valley. And, I think there's some like almost like, again, structural reasons why it's not true, like as in, well, talent and capital are two pretty important ingredients in building a company, and they're kind of attracted to ambition. So if you reduce your ambition, you actually, but I think there's also this thing that you just touched on, which is so powerful, which is that the biggest problems are hidden in plain sight. They're not, in the end, problem size really matters in determining the outcome. Like, if lots of people are trying lots of things, some will succeed, and the ones that succeed in the biggest problem spaces, like going from A to B, or, which buildings we live in, they will end up being really big companies. And I think one of the things that is often the difference in my experience between like the good and the great founders is actually just the willingness to see an obvious problem that is hidden because it's so big. It's very tempting to be like, oh, yeah,
hidden because we live in it, right? Like, it's hidden because it is the system.
Exactly. It's like the old joke about, the fish in water, what's water sort of thing. And I think sometimes it really is that I love it when I sit down opposite a founder who explains something to me that is so obvious after the fact. And yet at the time it has like the shock of realization. One of my former colleagues, who's now a founder, a guy called Alex Crompton, who was the first employee at EF and really built a lot of it. He often talked about different types of secrets in startups. And, he said that people like overstate the importance of a secret that is like complex and esoteric, and no one will ever, ever derive, like once it's out there, no one will ever be able to unpick. He's like, people should be looking for secrets that are like Pythagoras Theorem. Like, Pythagoras Theorem, you can teach a 6-year-old. In fact, we do that all over the world. But guess what? It was not easy to derive. Like, people before Pythagoras weren't walking around being like, well, this is intuitive. And there's just huge power to seeing seeing that there is a problem to be solved and just plugging away at solving it until it becomes legible enough to put people on it. And I spend so much of my time just trying to almost like push people into simpler, bigger problems. And I think there's a lot in that.
And it's so true. I think that the thing that you're saying with EF, with structure and ambition and right, the fish in the water, like the first time you point out to the fish, you're like, oh crap, this is water, right? And you do that over time. It's so interesting to see in the Silicon Valley ecosystem, the same with companies as of people, right? So maybe the first couple of times they go after esoteric problems, doesn't work. Then they go after simpler problems, or you work for someone who went after simpler problems, and then you see it, and then it becomes a muscle that you develop, right? Because even seeing the simple basic problems is like a skill set. And venture studios and so many things, that's what they're trained to. Like you just try a bunch of things in the right, like throw it against the wall. It's a system that works. You don't get personally attached to any of them. And it's so interesting to see people's journeys through. Like they may have started in a company startup that failed. They moved on to something else. And finally you latch onto something because you're just, like you just don't give up, right? And so you continue to learn about the system, and then you eventually sort of, in the process of doing that, you find like a simple problem that you want to work on.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just actually almost finding the phrase that conceptualizes something that is seen as like complex or distributed or incoherent into a sort of simple whole. I mean, just like
find them, right?
Like about them, you know, the Accurix guys, the way they eventually just reframe what they were doing, they were like, healthcare is a communication problem. And then suddenly, like, so much of what they were doing made sense. And also why solving that would be a big company made sense. And all these things that have been objections thrown at them. It's just like, okay, I'm not saying that it's actually, it's not the phrase itself that is the important bit, but it's when you start to see that that is the problem you are solving, it actually helps you. It helps you focus. It helps you, but it also helps. Suddenly, there's that click of why it's big and why it's important. I love that moment.
And it's so interesting. I think like when you the two ends of sort of the spectrum, right? It's like one is raising ambition, which I know which I know we were personally doing, which is so important. And then the other end of the spectrum is very, I love the quote that was attributed to Picasso, which is, right, like art critics talk about form and meaning, but like painters talk about the cost of turpentine. And so like the other one is like turpentine talks, right? It's like, okay, like what tool are you using? Yeah. For me, now that I know that healthcare is communication, like how can I speed up learning on basic stuff that you've done? And it almost seems like very different ends of the spectrum, but those two things, right? It's like when you see great founders, they have both of those. They have both the idea maze, and then they're like, okay, but like what tracking tool are you using? What email tool are you using? And it's
so true. So true. Yeah.
I always recommend to people to watch, if you haven't seen it so far, the 10-hour-long making of DVDs of Lord of the Rings. I think it's a masterclass in leadership and in working across different departments, because you have these thousands of people in New Zealand working on the 3 initial episodes, and Peter Jackson being the captain of the ship, overseeing everything from writing to sound department to the computer vision, whatever. And they talk to each of these departments, right? And you see the expertise, and then you see the leader who kind of both has a deep understanding of the material and the methods, but also kind of just leaves the sound department to do their work. Like they are the best at that in the world. That's why I hired you, you know, go and add the tiger roar to the Balrog, you know. And also like he talks a lot. I mean, he's obviously like this whole making of, you know, the interviews were filmed after the films had been released. So he's a bit more relaxed politically about what he's allowed to say. And he talks about how he pushed all the employees. And he says like people are capable of doing so much more than what they think they can, right? And he kind of across the 7 years of filming the 3 films, he understood intuitively where that limit is.
But I think there's something, I've not seen that, and now I'm
see Howard Shore like being like very pissed off as he's conducting, and he's like, okay, we'll do another round. It's like everybody's like to the limit.
But I think the thing he's done there, and I've not seen the films, I will watch them because I'm a huge fan of I've seen the films, I have not seen the making of, but I remember when I was probably like 16 or something, going down to, I didn't grow up in London, I grew up in the north of England, and very, very rarely went to London, but there was a Lord of the Rings film exhibition in London. And it was very exciting. I was like, wow, we're going to go to London with this. Anyway, and the thing that I took away from it most was that they had like a display of the suits of armor that they built for the like Rohirrim or something. And the engravings continued to the inside of the helmet. And I was like, wow, there is something just so incredible about that. No one was ever going to see the inside of the helmet, but the engravings continued. And I feel there's something about
people who will be so excited and take it so seriously that they will do the inside as well.
The kind of contagiousness of obsession that is a like real mark of a certain type of leadership, that you make people, you put, and I'm not sure if push is, I mean, there is a push. Don't get me wrong. I think like leaders do have to push, but there's something about, can you inspire the sense that level of obsession is normal and something to be like valued and valorized rather than like pushed to one side. And I always think about the inside of that helmet. I think it's amazing.
I knew about that Liv Tyler has these extreme close-ups, and she has these dark blue eyes, right? She has a very unique natural eye color. And so what they did was that the costume department, where they were actually like sewing the fabric, right? Like they made everything from scratch. And so like there was the yarn, and then there was the dress, like, and then cut too. And they basically added to all of her gowns a very, very, Swathy will be right back, a very, like intermittently blue thread. That you don't see it. And there is this moment where Peter Jackson realizes, and he didn't know, because obviously you don't have energy to basically, talk to everybody in the costume department. But it's just like, I would recommend for all leaders to watch it.
That is amazing. I love it.
Yeah, it's 10 hours. I tend to do it every. I used to watch the 10 hours every Christmas.
That's a great tradition.
Every year. Yeah.
I think my 2-year-old isn't quite ready for it, but you know, like once he is, that will be our new Christmas tradition. Yeah,
it's a bit dark, Lord of the Rings. But actually, I'm going to wrap up, and we can start with you if you're up for it, for a more personal.
Actually, can I give my one personal add to that? My like
yes.
My tangential life ambition.
Uncut, so people can see that this is like a very chill conversation. You guys are not intimidating. It's fine.
My one tangential like life ambition is to the contagiousness of obsession is so romantic when you see a film, but I'm like, just because it's a startup that has launched its new like email marketing system to have a smooth customer, I'm like, that is also art. It is art because I work on it on a daily basis. And I'm like, how do you showcase that in film and romanticize it? Because it's not as exciting as going to the Oscars and winning this, but like a customer experience that changes people's life. This is the part where it's like both techno optimism and clearly like Silicon Valley Kool-Aid, but I'm like, how do you present that and tell people that it's like it's reachable to all, and it is art. You're creating something that like changes people's lives. And so I'm trying to convince people to like write. How do you write? So many of TV series and movies are
publishing. Go with like courtroom dramas. Like there's the little intern, and he has been or she has been up for days, and the hair is like this, and the shirt is like this, and all the coffee's on the table, and then they find this one line in one of the big books, and then it's like, yeah.
Yes. That's such a good point, right? Because that's like that's exactly that. You know, that's sort of the professional services thing, right? And actually, when you start to run for, maybe I'm about to think of a million exceptions and I'll disagree with what I'm saying, but there are not even that many films about building anything.
No,
there are some, but you know, like it's not a thing that people have made a lot of films about.
And went straight from like that to Silicon Valley, right? Like it's not, Silicon Valley is one perspective, but it's like, there are lots more like non-nerdy white dudes working on stuff that meaningfully impacts the world. Can we feature them? Can we talk about them?
Yeah.
Anyway.
I
No,
watched
100%.
yesterday.
That's really interesting.
This interview came out with Aaron Sorkin, and he kind of goes through his career, and he talks a little bit about Social Network, obviously, and the Jobs movie, right? And it was so interesting to watch this guy who says he's not a Luddite, but he doesn't use email, Facebook, whatever. Okay, you're not a Luddite, I get it. And obviously he wrote these incredible films, and I wouldn't have anything to say against Social Network, again, other than probably that it's fully fictitious, right? But there should be more of this, right? Like Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs are not the only people who are interested in technology.
And sorry, and I didn't mean to interrupt. The connection was a little bit off, so I apologize. I was going to say I love Sorkin, but the way he looks at politics and West Wing is not how he looks at tech. And so my tangential ambition is I want to look at building tech startups in a cultural way, the way Sorkin looks at politics and West Wing. Because there's an art, there's a craft. You come out of it being like, wow, I want to go into that. And you need that for tech companies, right? It's not just like, oh, it's some misogynistic place where only nerdy people and mostly men survive. And you're like, no, like this is building the future of the world. Don't you want a place at the table to do this?
That's so interesting. I never thought of that. That's so true. But that's sort of like, romanticized.
You wanted to be in politics. No, you went into tech instead of politics.
Yeah, exactly. And I grew up watching West Wing, so but it's true. Like I think like what the West Wing takes seriously for all its I think I don't know if you've rewatched it recently, but it's actually pretty cringe to rewatch in 2020. Like
it is.
it would not get made today. It's anyway, but a different topic. But the like sincerity with which he views people's desire to change the world for the better. Almost to a fault, as in he actually excuses a lot of behavior that I think today we would just like I'd never thought of that. I really like that. That's great.
But tech doesn't have the same brush, right? Like the way he looks at Social Network, like, oh, this awkward gangly guy trying to get back with his girlfriend, and I'm like, what a reductive view of something that changes. There are the crop farmers in Bangladesh exchanging news about this. You think he's sitting around worried about his ex-girlfriend? Like, come on. Anyway, so clearly you know which camp I follow.
The episode with Sonia Bastos, who used to work for Hillary Clinton and then now works at Atmos building homes in America, and Neer Sharma. And we were talking about, both of them, they wanted to work in public service, they wanted to work in politics, but for our generation, if you want to create an impact, you go into technology. I went into technology for the same reasons in a moment where I was considering going into politics. And, because this is, I think for millennials and Gen Z, this is the arena where worlds are built and improved. And so, there's this angle to a criticism against technology where you think, where's the same people? Like these people, 50 years ago would all be in policymakers and lawmakers. And it's an interesting, probably there's something so sinister looking about automation and technology that is very hard to grasp or to consider graspable from the outside, which probably would be a good subject for entire conversation. Kind of to conclude, I want to ask you a more personal question, because I know this is something I discussed with both of you individually, and I have a salon coming up, I think on the 26th of November, about firstborn children and people who feel born to take on a lot of responsibility. And you both are leaders, you both have your own takes on what to automate and what to keep manual enough to create intuitions. Does it make sense to you from a logical point of view that you ended up in this profession? Did you see it coming, or was it a result of some kind of series of surprises?
Go for it, Matt.
I was hoping you'd go first so I could try and think of it.
Like, pass. Maybe one learning.
I guess in a way I would. The only thing I can think to say is sort of, what you were just saying, which is, I do think that for anyone who seeks impact, the decision of what to do is sort of really mediated through the moment and the place that you happen to, be born in or grow up in or whatever. And, I exactly as you said, like I spent most of my childhood and most of, like undergrad, assuming I would go into politics. And, I changed my mind about that because it became clear to me that internet scale, for want of a better phrase, was just a game changer for impact. And anything that you could, any sort of positive impact you could have at the unit scale, if you could deliver that through the internet, then it opened up possibilities for levels of impact that would be really hard to achieve through other means. And increasingly it also felt a bit more philosophically that tech, and in particular the act of building, was a positive sum game in a way that kind of too often politics wasn't. And so in some ways I think, like, if you looked at my resume, I would say it looks like I fell into it. I did a degree in medieval history, never mind systems engineering. I was like, I can tell you about how we introduced different farming techniques to improve crop yields in 14th century Norfolk. It's not a conversation I have very often at work these days. But in other ways,
more Interintellect salons, because this is actually something that comes up.
But I feel like the non-accidental bit is, and the reason, to go back to the very beginning, the reason that, I spent the last 9 years building EF is that I do think that there's something really, once in a generation around this moment where cultures globally are being more, the culture of Silicon Valley, hopefully the best bits of it are globalizing, and there's an opportunity to really help shape the careers of some of this century's most impactful people. And so, I think in a way that feels like a very natural place for me to end up, given what I always wanted to achieve. But it's not if you told me when I was 18, I think I'd be very surprised.
What do you think made you a person so early on that wanted to create an impact? Who raised your ambitions?
Actually, I mean, like, I think it was, I think I was reading, actually, probably things like The Lord of the Rings. I think it was like developing a very amplified sense of, the epic and what's possible. I don't know. I need to think more about that.
I can go quickly.
The under-discussed benefits of reading epic fiction. Yeah, I mean, this is why the epics were written in Homer's time, right? To raise the ambitions of, Plato would agree with this, raise the ambitions of the young gods. Swathy, as a coda for our conversation, what was your route to where you are?
I think definitely you can only connect the dots looking backward. And I think I grew up so much looking at people. When you look at the end polished story of how somebody got there, I just used to be in despair, because I'm like, I have no clear idea. I'm just in a fog. And this person probably like woke up when they're 18 and like a halo shined on them, and like they had a path. And that's when you realize, like, no, everything is messy. It's so path dependent. I was doing this fun exercise where I was looking at my past 15 years, and I'm like, there's each single point where I could have taken a path completely different from this one. And so, but I think the driving thing was like building something. And in the very canonical, like, example, my grandfather started a retail store, and me and my parents lived above the retail store, and I would earn like pocket money by like selling stuff. It's the equivalent of the lemonade stand. And, he's the type of person.
That's your story.
It is, right? It's like that is the story, right? And he's the type of person who had a stroke, but after he could sit up, he would want to sit in a corner of the store, because he's like, I feel the pulse of the store, right? Like, that's him. So he would just sit there with his cane and like observe people going in and out. And so when and my grandmother, right, like ran the marketing of the store. And so like they were a couple that built this, and their whole life was around this. And so I always knew I would go into business, because it was just so obvious. And I think, I started off in like not wanting to be an entrepreneur, because I was like, oh, it's so exhausting. Like, you couldn't even take vacation, right? Because you're always thinking about this. But I think I think after, was path dependent, but I think I realized it's just, you actually love it. Like after your teenage rebellion against it, it's just like, it feels, it's exhausting, no doubt, right? It's like lack of sleep and being constantly caffeinated is definitely side effects, but it's like, what a fun place to be, right? It's to build meaningful, or at least have a shot at building meaningful things with incredible people. I'm like, what a way to live a life. And so that's my,
I mean, thank you so much for sharing. And there is, kind of derived from Aristotelian virtue ethics, there is a very strong contemporary school in psychology that say that the level of happiness is always equal to the level of responsibility that you take on yourself. So for example, if you're a child, if you have anything that depends on you, while intuitively that would seem like a great hassle, but the person's level of actual happiness will be higher. Not always, but in like overall. And I think that's so true about companies as well. Like the amount of fulfillment and meaning and just never having to worry about not having enough to do in life is just like, it's never going to be a problem again if you start your own company. So guys, those who watch, start your company today. Thank you so much, guys. This has been a joy, and I still kind of hold to my opinion that you guys should do a podcast together. The minutiae of.
It was a good test run. This is the pilot episode.
This is my secret plan. Thank you so much. I think this is going to be published today, and then you can send anonymous comments under it if you like. If you like to continue arguing with yourselves. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye, guys.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Anna.